The first real chance to bring the end of the war closer. Global Peace Summit to be held in Switzerland, with leaders of countries from all continents in attendance.
They don't invite us.
The purpose of the summit is to develop an anonymous position of states from all over the world and convey it to the Kremlin. A huge number of leaders, not only from the West, but also from the global South, from countries that have influence on Russia, together will be able to force Putin to negotiate on Ukrainian terms. Why could this event go into world history? And why is Putin so afraid of the consequences of this conference? Watch in the special report Peace Summit from a formula to the war's end.
От формулы к окончанию войны.
There are huge hopes for it, and it has already caused real hysterics in the Kremlin. The first Global Peace Summit will bring together representatives of 160 countries and international organizations. Neutral Switzerland will become a platform for dialogue at the highest level on ways to achieve comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine on the basis of international law and the UN Charter.
Международного права и устава ООН.
The conference will be held amidst the Alps in the heart of Switzerland at the Bürgenstock Resort near the city of Lucerne.
The conference is aimed at finding opportunities and ways to start the peace process. There is already support for holding the conference at the highest level as the start of the process of establishing a lasting and just peace in Ukraine.
The Peace Summit will bring together the majority of Western leaders: Olaf Scholz, Emmanuel Macron, Donald Tusk, Giorgia Meloni, Justin Trudeau were among the first to confirm their participation. Leaders from the global South will also be there. Heads of the states of the African continent, South America, Asia. Russia will not attend at the conference.
They don't invite us. Moreover, they say they don't see us. Why should we? But if you do this, then we're kind of asking for it. If you do like this, then we would make such decisions. Well, they don't see us, so we don't need this.
The Kremlin was not going to take part in the International Peace Summit, responded to Russia Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Zakharova grudgingly. And she keeps threatening, regardless of any international conferences, Russia will continue its war of conquest.
Current tasks of the special military operation will be accomplished.
Putin's press secretary Peskov is also outraged, saying that the West and Ukraine do not want to accept Russia's ultimatums. Therefore, the war will continue.
In the conditions of unwillingness of the countries of the collective West and unwillingness of Ukraine to take our security considerations into account, we are conducting and maintaining a special military operation.
Neither Switzerland is suitable for Russia. This time it is the reaction of Lavrov, the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry. But in the case of any other negotiations in any other countries, the Kremlin will not cease fire.
We are not going to cease hostilities for the period of negotiations. The process must go on.
Процесс должен идти.
No one expected any other reaction from the Kremlin as its always henchman. It is absolutely predictable. And even if Russia were at the peace summit, it would just predictably block any peace initiative. Its representatives would speak the language of ultimatums and propaganda clichés. And the purpose of the global conference is not to satisfy Putin. The point is different. At this summit, the world community should develop a unified approach, create a roadmap. And they decided to start with 3 specific points. These are the first steps to end the war: nuclear security, food security, and the third is the release of all prisoners and deportees. Both Ukraine, the West and the global South are interested in the fulfillment of these points.
Заинтересованы и Украина, и страны Запада, и страны глобального Юга.
Nuclear security. Absolutely all are in favor of it, including the countries that have not joined the sanction against Russia and continue to trade with it. Those some countries in Africa, Latin America, India, China.
Nuclear security is very important to them, very important, critically important to China. If we can come out of the summit with a decision that there should be no attacks on critical infrastructure and there should be nuclear security, I think the support of the world would help a lot here.
This is the first and priority point of President Zelensky's peace formula. After all, back in February 2022, Russia seized Europe's largest nuclear power plant, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. It mined it. It brought military equipment and ammunition. It constantly arranges provocation, hitting the power units with drones, and blames Ukraine for these sabotages. The Russian military is shelling power lines. The ZNPP has already been blacked out many times. This is very dangerous. Electricity is crucially needed to cool the reactors.
If all of a sudden the power supply is gone and the fuel starts heating up, what happened in Fukushima when the power supply was lost and within a few days the fuel heated up to the point where this reactor, the cap went up and the radioactive steam came out of it.
Крышка на ветре поднялась, и из нее выскочил радиоактивный пар.
In order to prevent this from happening, Ukrainian electricians urgently restored damaged power lines every time. And the world is on the verge of a nuclear catastrophe. And this risk has increased tenfold. Now the reactors on the nuclear power plant are in a state of shutdown. The Russians want to start them, and this is under condition of water deficit for cooling, for which they themselves are guilty. After all, they themselves destroyed the water reservoir with water from which the reactors were cooled by undermining the Kakhonka HPP dam.
If Rosatom, the state nuclear corporation of Russia, attempts to restart and actually is successful in restarting one or more nuclear reactors, that will dramatically increase the risk of a severe radiation event, potentially much worse than Fukushima.
And this radiation can spread for thousands of kilometers around to the territory of Ukraine, Turkey, EU countries and the Middle East, and to Russia itself.
This is the catastrophic consequences of the radioactive accident. It covers large territories and keeps affecting the environment, not even for decades, but for centuries. And Russia is exposing millions of people to this terrible threat.
That is why the immediate withdrawal of Russian troops from the ZNPP is critical for the whole world. Russia must demilitarize the plant and place it under the control of the International Atomic Energy Agency and Ukrainian personnel. And Putin himself must stop threatening other countries with nuclear weapons.
Russia is constantly blackmailing everyone with its nuclear weapons. That's why the nuclear security paragraph is fundamentally important. Even China, which has a formally neutral position on the war between Russia and Ukraine, supports the impossibility of using nuclear weapons.
Food security is a second item of the President Zelensky peace formula and the agenda of the peace summit in Switzerland. Ukraine is one of the largest producers of the agricultural products on the planet. It can supply more than 45 million tons of grain to the world market. That's 10% of all wheat exports. Russia is trying to block supplies by shelling ports and ships. In the first year of the war, the Russian Federation managed to drastically reduce volumes. As a result, prices on the world market rose and a deficit occurred. This was felt by billions of people around the world. The most dependent on the food supplies are the African states.
The same Egypt is now suffering very seriously economically, so if there is a famine or the prices of basic foodstuffs skyrocket, we are well aware of the potential consequences.
After a drastic drop in the standard of living, protests and political upheaval often begin in African countries, and the leaders of the Global South understand this.
It is simply a question of political survival, so I think that they can press and they should press if they want to survive politically on this Olympus. One of the tasks that Putin's system has set itself is to export chaos. Those gathered in Switzerland will try to develop a common strategy to counter this policy of Moscow.
Этой политики Москвы.
Realizing that it is bringing famine to the poorest countries of the world, Russia continues to hit Ukrainian ports and grain storage facilities with missiles and drones. By doing so, it is disrupting grain supply contracts.
If this continues, it may naturally lead to a significant number of ships simply refusing to enter Ukrainian territory under the pretext of security.
At the peace summit, the issue of food security will be raised in the context of increased supplies of missile defense systems and other weapons to protect southern Ukraine. Armed forces of Ukraine have already pushed back the Black Sea fleet and gained control of the Black Sea, thus providing a corridor for free shipping.
It is very important that those armored supplies that are going to Ukraine, including for the Black Sea, which are carried out by our partners, including England, continue to help Ukraine in the context of ensuring the safety of passage of ships in the Black Sea.
And the third item to be discussed at the peace summit is the release of all prisoners and deported persons. Thousands of Ukrainians, military and civilian, are in Russian captivity. In addition, the Russian Federation has kidnapped at least 20,000 Ukrainian children. These are only identified cases. In reality, there are many more.
Every week there are 10-15 decisions on deprivation of parental rights and removal of children in the temporarily occupied territories.
The Russians brainwash the kidnapped children with their propaganda, nurture hatred for their native country, educate them in the spirit of militarism and prepare them as future soldiers for the next wars of conquest.
For teenagers, there's a paramilitary movement at schools. They are taught to rat on each other, to rat on their family. They work with each of them individually. What about your parents? How do you feel about Russia? You should be ready to die for Russia.
These children have been taken away from their families. Many have had their parents killed. They themselves are kept in orphanages or foster families of the aggressor state. Thousands of adults have also been deported. At least 8,000 Ukrainians, both military and civilian, are now in captivity in the hands of the Russians. The Russians are keeping them in inhuman condition and brutally torturing them. President Zelensky insists on an all-for-all exchange.
All reasonable countries support this track. We have exchanges going on. They are slower than we would like. Some people skeptically say that it will be only after the end of war, because that is one of the conditions for the end of the war. I believe that we have the opportunity to do it earlier. There is a practical platform, the Peace Summit. If all the countries that will be there support these issues, then there will be further detailed developments and solution of them from the Russian side with the mediation of other countries.
This concerns all the items that will be discussed at the first peace summit: the return of prisoners and deportees, the issue of nuclear security and food security. For each of these items, the conference will form a concrete action plan, and then individual countries will bring it to Russia. Ukraine will not negotiate directly with the Kremlin.
Украина напрямую с Кремлем вести переговоры не будет.
In public, Russia is disdainful of the peace summit. Putin declares he is not going to listen to the decision of this meeting.
Are you out of your mind? Why would we do that?
But this is just a plan in front of video cameras. But the Kremlin will have to take the result of the summit non-publicly into account. The huge number of participants from all continents will add great geopolitical weight to the summit. Russia will be forced to negotiate. It will be placed within a framework and will not be able to dictate.
A number of countries around the world, including a number of the organizers of the summit, for example Switzerland, but also Turkey, for example, perhaps China, will suggest that the next step is to start negotiations with Russia, not directly but through intermediaries, when simultaneously the intermediaries would be negotiating both with the Ukrainian and the Russian sides. The likelihood of direct negotiations between Ukraine and Russia is not so high.
The whole world is forcing Putin to peace. This statement, which the dictator used during the invasion of Georgia, has now boomeranged back on him. But this is no longer a propaganda cliché, but a real enforcement of peace, and this is what the war-mad regime fears most of all, and it resists with all its might. Russia was making great efforts to sabotage the peace summit.
They are well aware that the peace initiative, which is based on respect for Ukraine's territorial integrity, is one of the very nails in the coffin of Russian aggression.
And it was using every method available.
Russian diplomats, special services, special representatives in different countries of the world are trying to force certain countries of the global south to refuse to participate in this peace summit. They are being blackmailed by literally threatening that Russia, for example, will stop financial aid to this country, or will not invest in this country, or will stop supplying its energy resources to this country, especially the countries of Africa which are dependent on Russia in this respect.
Despite intimidation and manipulation, threats and blackmail, both partners and leaders of countries that have ceased any relation with Russia are united against Russia, which unleashed a bloody war in Ukraine and solve unprecedented challenges to eliminate the consequences of aggression and look for ways to stop it, while Putin, on the camera, continues to convince he is in favor of peace, he is ready to negotiate.
We're open to discussion, we'll have to make a deal. We're never said no, we are open. If he receives an offer for peace negotiations taking into account the position of Ukraine and the international community, then he will either be forced to accept that position and start negotiations taking into account the Ukrainian conditions, or if he rejects them, then the whole world will see that Putin is actually against negotiations for a just peace. He has to be forced to peace. On his own, Putin will not agree to negotiate peace on equal terms.
The Russian dictator always used negotiations just to buy time, regroup, build up his forces, and to attack even more. There are many examples of this. Russia attacked Ukraine 10 years ago, in 2014. It annexed Crimea. With the help of puppet separatists, it seized parts of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, constantly shelled the Ukrainian-controlled territories in the east of the country. Then the military actions were tried to stop with the help of negotiations. In Belarus, the so-called Minsk Agreement were signed with the participants of France, Germany and the OSCE. There was Minsk I, then Minsk II, and all this became a synonym for the West's inability to cope with the challenge. They did not bring to long-awaited peace closer. Putin did not reduce military aggression, but only increase it.
I have made a decision to conduct a special military operation.
February 24th, 2022. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. And again, an attempt of negotiation. They began literally in the very first days after the attack already at the end of February. And again in Belarus. This time Russia did not stop its aggression, but on the contrary, committed more and more atrocities. Then the negotiations were moved to Istanbul. And they also end with nothing. It was already well known about mass torture, shooting in Bucha and Irpin, and the destruction of entire neighborhoods in Mariupol. Then it became clear to all civilized countries that Putin is not interested in peace. Peace must be forced upon him by all available methods: diplomatic, economic, military. A dictator understands only the language of force. How to stop the war, Ukraine has proposed a definite line of action. This is Zelensky 10-point peace formula. After the summit in Switzerland, there will be several more global conferences. They will consider the prescribe an algorithm for solving the remaining 7 points of the Ukrainian peace formula.
Украинская формула мира.
Energy security. Russian strikes are destroying Ukraine's energy infrastructure, power plants, transformers and power lines. The Kremlin wants to plunge Ukraine into darkness and peace of Europe.
Our system has already been synchronized with the energy systems of Eastern and Central Europe. For the past more than 2 years, the strikes on the Ukrainian energy sector have reduced the reliability of the entire synchronized energy system of Eastern and Central Europe.
Russia is deliberately creating an energy crisis. This is one of the elements of its terror.
What has been done by the Russian Federation is a real crime, because it is not so much about generating electricity as about providing heat to citizens. And at the same time, the Russian Federation knows that it is impossible to heat apartment buildings with any other means if they are connected to the centralized heat supply.
Если они подключены к централизованному теплоснабжению.
Ukraine calls on its partners to respond by hitting the Kremlin's sore spot to further limit prices for Russian energy resources.
We must take a fundamental step to ensure that energy resources are no longer used as a weapon. If Russia is trying to deprive Ukraine, Europe and all energy consumers in the world of predictability and price stability, then the answer should be to forcibly limit export prices for Russia. To keep exports lower than the cost of production, that's fair. If you take it away, the world has the right to take it away from you.
The next point of Zelensky's peace plan is to implement the UN Charter and restore Ukraine's territorial integrity and world order. Russia should confirm Ukraine's territorial integrity. Article 2 of the UN Charter says, all members of the United Nations shall refrain from the threats or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. This article cannot be enforced partially, selectively, at will. It must be enforced. There can be no compromise with the aggressor. Otherwise, it will set a precedent. Militarily stronger states will start to invade weak countries. Borders will begin to change. The world legal order will collapse. So not only Kyiv, but the entire civilized world is interested in the implementation of this point of President Zelensky's plan. Negotiations with Russia must be on Ukrainian terms. This is recognized by the leaders of many countries. President Zelensky's peace formula clearly provides for the complete withdrawal of Russian troops and the cessation of hostilities. Russia must deoccupy the entire territory of Ukraine.
But one of their biggest successes is that they made people focus all discussions on what Ukraine has to concede, on the compromises that Ukraine has to make. It had been the case between 2014 and 2022. All the conversations were like what Ukraine will do to make Russia leave it alone. It had been the case.
Every day of delay brings death to Ukrainians. Soldiers are killed in battles on the front. Peaceful citizens are killed as a result of missile strikes.
Global efforts are needed. Global Peace Summit of the leaders whom Russia will not be able to deceive. Summit that will show who in the world really wants to end the war and not just claim the ceasefire, which will inevitably be broken by Russian rockets and artillery, just like as it was dozens of times before.
Justice. This is the next point in the Ukrainian peace plan. In the liberated territories, there are few fines, Russian treatment facilities and mass graves of murdered locals. This was the case in Bucha, Kharkiv and Kherson regions. Because of Russian aggression, thousands of civilians died. Entire towns have been destroyed. Thousands of residential houses, schools, hospitals and kindergartens have been destroyed. Ukraine insists on the setting up of a special tribunal on Russia's war crimes and on the development of international mechanisms for the Kremlin to compensate for the losses it caused by its war.
The decision of this tribunal will be full-fledged and unchallengeable. That is to say that here, from a legal point of view, it will be impossible to appeal in any way. That is, there will be a decision on the basis of which Russia will be held accountable. It will be the final argument that is the one against which nothing can be put.
The eighth point of the Ukrainian peace plan is to counter ecocide and immediately protect nature. Another reason why Russian troops should withdraw from Ukraine immediately is the threat of the environment. Every day of fighting only exacerbates the environmental disaster that Putin's invasion has caused. Its consequences must be eliminated as soon as possible. And this is in the interest not only of Ukraine, but of the whole world. A huge number of countries have suffered in one way or another because of the Russians' undermining of the Kakhovka HPP dam. There is no Kakhovka reservoir now, and it provided irrigation for almost the entire south of Ukraine. Those lands have become no longer suitable for agriculture, as well as flooded and eroded areas after the water outflow.
We will not have the opportunity to renew some lands. Some lands will no longer be suitable for farming. This is a reduction in the amount of agricultural land. This is also the environmental risk that is closely intervened with food security.
Который тесно переплетается с продовольственной безопасностью.
The destruction of the dam resulted in unprecedented environmental pollution. The Dnipro River water swept away everything on its way. Garbages, cemeteries, animal burial grounds, sewage systems, gas stations with fuel, and appliances with toxic substances. All this went down the Dnipro River. Some of it went into the Black Sea.
This is a disaster for the Black Sea ecosystem, and this disaster is not just for a week, a month, or even a year. There are self-cleaning mechanisms, but it can take years and even decades for the sea to clean itself.
Millions of acres of forest have been burned due to the saline. Hundreds of thousands of acres of land are covered with shells and did not burst. Dozens of coal mines are flooded. Water contaminated with toxic substances is rising to the surface. Environmental losses are already estimated at $55 billion. Funds and technologies are needed for cleanup and remediation and mine clearance.
The echoes of war will long remain in the explosions of mines that will take the lives of children and adults, the contamination of water, soils and atmosphere.
And even after Russian troops leave the territory of Ukraine, the risk of aggression from the Russian Federation will not disappear anywhere. Volodymyr Zelensky insists on the next point of the peace plan – avoiding escalation. Ukraine is not a member of any alliance. Therefore, guarantees that a Russian invasion will not happen again are needed. An international conference should be held to document the key aspects of the post-war security architecture in the Euro-Atlantic area, including security for Ukraine.
Включая и безопасность для Украины.
The main outcome of the conference should be the signing of the Kyiv Security Compact. Ukraine has prepared a draft of this agreement and has already proposed it to its partners. It can be signed at any time, even before all hostilities cease. And the final point of the peace plan is to document the end of the war. When all the previous steps have been realized, the parties should sign a document saying so.
Ukraine is clearly aware that the war will end in negotiation. That is why President Zelensky's peace formula has been prepared and is being promoted. And I am convinced that it will be supported by the participants.
All 10 points of the peace formula are absolutely justified. They are based on the crimes, acts and threats that Russia has committed in Ukraine. The decision made at the peace summit will have enormous political weight and legitimacy, and Russia will be forced to reckon with them.
This will be a powerful signal of support for Ukrainian independence, territorial integrity and sovereignty. It is a very important signal that world leaders can address such important issues as ending the war as searching for just peace without the participation of the aggressor country.
The Ukrainian peace formula is now the only initiative in which the international community remains interested. The European Union is working on bringing this plan to the global level.
The European Parliament fully supports all 10 points of the Ukrainian peace plan. Nothing can be decided without the full consent of the Ukrainians. On behalf of the European Parliament, I would like to say the only formula of the European Parliament is exactly President Zelensky's plan.
The Peace Summit in Switzerland will be a global event that will create a foundation for a just peace. Civilized countries are on Ukraine's side, and there will be peace on Ukraine's terms, and with the full support and assistance of the international community. Without Russia's participation, a roadmap will be worked out: how to achieve peace in Ukraine and how to force Russia to pay for their crimes committed in Ukraine. Russia will simply be faced with the decision of Ukraine and its many partners and allies.
Украины и ее многочисленных партнеров и союзников.
Maxim Urlapov, Special Report.